How to become a UFC fighter? Guys, I've been messaged this question probably 5 times a week, every week. Now, there are many ways to get into the UFC these days. You know, the sport has become a lot more popular. There are more UFC cards on than there have ever been. It's not like there's one on a month. They're pretty much every week now. So that means they need more fighters. Now, the 3 ways to get into the UFC. Obviously, you've got the front door, guys. This is like myself, where the UFC have messaged you, they've contacted you or your manager, and they've said, I want to sign this guy. You know, I want to sign you to the UFC for this day against this opponent. Once you sign that contract, guys, you are officially a UFC fighter. You've got the Ultimate Fighter. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. It's the series, you know, where you go into the house. I think you're there for, let's say, 8 weeks. I think you have to have 3 fights to get into the final. If you win, you're guaranteed a 6-figure contract in the UFC. A lot of the guys still that don't win necessarily get signed sometimes. So that is your, let's call it, number 2 way of getting in the UFC. Number 3, guys, you've got Dana White's Contender Series, which, if you know our guy Lonnie Kavanagh, just got signed. He fought on there, and I think Dana White offers 3 or 4 contracts at the end of the show to the fighters that he believes, you know, are most suited for the UFC or most impressed him, etc. So from Lonnie's example, he went in there and knocked the guy out in the first round. At the end of the show, Dana White handed him that UFC contract, and now he is an official UFC fighter. Obviously, guys, it's very easy to say that's your 3 options. How do you get there? Obviously, you've got to win your fights, okay? First and foremost, you've got to win your fights. If you're losing, you're not going to potentially be in that position to go into the UFC. The main thing, guys, as well, is being exciting, you know. Doesn't necessarily mean you need the finishes, but they always help. If you see a guy that's 10-0 and he's finished every fighter in the first round, he's going to have a better chance than the guy who's 10-0 who has gone the decision every time. So my advice on that one would be, obviously, train very hard so that you win your fights, and B, try and be as entertaining as you can. Not necessarily stupid in the fights to the point where you lose it, but try not to be boring. Try and get the crowd going. Try and fight so that the UFC spot you from the other 20 fighters that are on the card. Next option, guys. Obviously, a good manager always helps. Okay, if your manager has many UFC fighters on their roster and is dealing with the UFC on a day-to-day basis, there's a good chance that he's going to have that personal connection with the matchmakers, whether it's Dana White, etc. They can obviously put a word in. That's not going to guarantee you getting in, but they would take more notice of someone they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis who says, take this guy, I recommend this guy, you know, he's ready, whatever. Hamza Chimaev was once just a UFC debut guy, and who knew that he was going to be the absolute monster that he is? But it took someone to put him in there. You know, obviously his manager or his coach, I don't know personally, had to say, I've got this guy, he's amazing, I recommend him. And now obviously the UFC have got him. They're obviously very thankful that they got him. If now that same manager or coach goes forward and say, I've got another guy, he's just as good, etc., that's obviously going to get a little bit more notice than potentially a coach or a manager that the UFC have no dealings with who has just sent them a basic email. Another one, guys, is obviously the regional shows that you're on kind of determine where you're going to go. If you're fighting on a show that no one's ever heard of in some small little town, it's not necessarily going to get your name out there like promotions such as Cage Warriors, Bellator, PFL are going to do. You know, if you get on these smaller shows to the UFC, but bigger than these other regional shows, that's going to get you noticed. I personally was fighting on Cage Warriors. I won the title, defended the title, and actually got offered a contract, which I declined because at the time it was short notice. I knew that I wouldn't be making weight. I also had a bout agreed with Cage Warriors, which may have, you know, caused complications. So I stuck it out, obviously won my 3rd defense, and that was what got me the contract. You know, now that was risky because if I had lost that fight, there was a good chance that the UFC would have ripped that contract up and it would have been gone. But obviously I won it, got the win, then got signed and faced Johnny Eduardo in my debut. One more thing as well, guys, that I would recommend is really try and boost your social media profile, okay? If you're a very known guy that's selling lots of tickets that people are talking about, word is going to get out there, yeah? Whether it's on the regional scene, whether it's on Cage Warriors, Bellator, the more you're known, the better it is going to be in getting these promotions, the better it's going to be when it comes to negotiating your purses, and the more bang for your buck you're going to get if you are a bigger name. So the thing that I would recommend is getting on all social medias, promote your name, take promos if you get offered them. We have many guys in these gyms today that don't really, put any effort in getting good promos, and they're going to miss out on building a good fan base that they could be building to help them, obviously, get on them big shows.